The laughter started with a whisper. It always did. In the hushed luxury of business class, where champagne glasses clinked and silk scarves rustled, the quiet mockery spread like perfume sweet on the surface, toxic underneath. The object of ridicule was not the man with the diamond cufflinks or the woman with the fur shawl. It was the young Vietnamese woman in seat 14B. Hoa Karen sat pressed against the window, her cardigan faded, her jeans frayed at the knees. She carried a battered canvas backpack, the kind you'd expect on a crowded bus, not among monogrammed luggage and polished leather briefcases. To the other passengers, she didn't belong. To them, she was an intruder in a temple of wealth. "Must be a raffle ticket," one man said loudly, his Rolex flashing under the overhead lights. His friends chuckled, sipping their scotch, eyes darting toward her with open disdain. A woman in a sequin shawl wrinkled her nose, as if Karen carried the scent of something unrefined. "Embarrassing," she murmured. "This cabin is supposed to be exclusive." Karen heard them, every word. Yet she didn't lift her gaze. She pulled the cardigan tighter around her shoulders and looked out of the oval window where the clouds rolled like endless seas of white. Her silence was neither meekness nor surrender. It was the kind of quiet forged from years of learning when not to waste words. The cabin was alive with its hierarchy. Men in tailored suits swapped stock tips. Influencers rehearsed their curated smiles for Instagram stories. An older couple compared their grandchildren's private schools, as if reciting scripture. Everyone wore their status like armor. Everyone but her. Karen's nails were short and bare of polish, her ponytail plain, her shoes practical and scuffed. She looked like a maid who had wandered into the wrong section. The first flight attendant passed by, pausing at her row. His professional smile was thin, brittle. "Ma'am, please tuck your bag further under the seat," he said, voice clipped, as if the backpack itself offended the cabin's symmetry. She nodded, complied without a word, then folded her hands in her lap. Behind the attendant, two passengers exchanged a glance and smirked. The turbulence came suddenly, a shudder through the fuselage that rattled glasses and silenced laughter. Someone gasped, clutching their armrest. A businessman across the aisle muttered a curse, and for a fleeting second, everyone looked equal fear flattening the pyramid of class. But as quickly as it came, the plane steadied, and the false calm returned. Snickers rose again, this time sharper. She even flinched. A young woman in designer heels whispered, loud enough for Karen to hear. Not used to flying, clearly. Karen's fingers traced the edge of her backpack, lingering on the worn fabric. She inhaled slowly, exhaled slower. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, yet it cut through the smug laughter like glass against velvet. "They're comfortable," she said, glancing once at the woman's shoes. The reply was simple, almost casual, but it left the woman blinking, caught off guard, her crimson lips parting without a retort. The silence that followed was thin, fragile. For a moment, the balance of power shifted, not enough to stop the whispers, but enough to unsettle them. Karen turned back to the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried something deeper, something that unsettled anyone who dared look too long. No one on that flight knew her story. Not yet. They saw only the surface, the faded clothes, the quiet demeanor. What they didn't see was the weight she carried, the years written not on her skin but in her hands. Those hands had once held lives, guided fragile threads back from the edge of death. Those hands, mocked for their plainness, would soon silence a cabin full of arrogance when fate decided to strike. And fate always strikes when least expected. The hours after takeoff stretched in quiet cruelty. The cabin, lulled by the steady hum of engines and the faint clinking of cutlery, had returned to its rituals of luxury. Businessmen ordered their second rounds of whiskey. A pair of influencers filmed themselves clinking champagne glasses. A woman in Chanel reapplied lipstick in a compact mirror, as though her reflection were the only audience worth impressing. And then it happened. A soft groan, barely audible over the hum, rose from 3 rows ahead. An elderly man, heavy-set with thinning hair, clutched his chest. His face drained of color as his breathing quickened, shallow and panicked. His wife gasped, fumbling for the call button. For one frozen instant, no one moved. They stared, mouths parted, eyes wide spectators to another person's suffering. Karen was already on her feet. She crossed the aisle, steady against the slight shake of the cabin. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, kneeling at his side. Her voice was calm, not a ripple of fear in its tone. The man nodded weakly, his lips pale. She placed her palm flat against his chest, her other hand resting lightly on his wrist. "Breathe with me. In slow, out slow." The rhythm of her words carried a quiet authority. The man followed, shaky at first, then steadier. His breaths aligned with hers, the panic ebbing like a tide retreating. Within minutes, his face regained some color. Relief washed through the row as his wife clutched his hand, whispering gratitude. But gratitude is fickle. A woman across the aisle, her lipstick a sharp scarlet slash against pale skin, leaned toward her seatmate. "Just luck," she muttered, her words sharp as glass. Probably saw it in a first aid video online. The man beside her, a tech entrepreneur with a leather jacket and a man bun, smirked. "Yeah, anyone can rub someone's chest and play doctor." Their voices weren't meant to whisper. They wanted her to hear. Karen returned to her seat without a word. She pulled her backpack closer, her fingers brushing its frayed edge. From inside, she drew a small notebook plain, leather-bound, its corners bent from years of use. She flipped to a page filled with cramped handwriting, notes scrawled in a language only she could decode. She scribbled something with a slow, deliberate hand, as though sealing the moment inside ink. A flight attendant stopped by her row. Her smile was tight, rehearsed. "Ma'am, your bag is sticking out too far. Could you push it all the way in?" Her tone carried no warmth, only clipped irritation. Karen nodded, nudged the backpack further, and whispered, "Sure." The attendant moved on, but not before exchanging a glance with a passenger draped in silk, who smirked. "Bet she's got nothing in there but tissues and snacks," the woman said. Her companion, a man with a diamond pinky ring, chuckled. Karen's hand lingered on the backpack. For a brief moment, her eyes closed, as though centering herself. Then she reopened the notebook, her pen moving once more. Halfway through the flight, the mood sharpened. The cruelty shifted from subtle barbs to open disdain. A cluster of passengers near the front, 3 women with monogram bags and glittering earrings, began whispering loudly. One of them, tall with platinum hair and a Chanel dress, leaned forward, her wine glass catching the light. "That girl in 14B is ruining the vibe," she said, wrinkling her nose. "I swear I can smell the thrift store from here." Laughter rippled among her friends. Karen reached into her backpack, retrieving a small, dented pillbox. Its paint was chipped, its lid scratched. She opened it, slipped a white tablet onto her tongue, and swallowed with a sip of water. The click of the pillbox closing drew attention. A man in a pinstripe suit frowned. "What is she, sick or something?" he said loudly, his voice carrying like an accusation. "Great. Now we're all going to catch it." Cold laughter rose again. Karen did not flinch. She held the pillbox in her palm for a second longer, then slid it back into her bag. "It's just aspirin," she said, her voice soft yet audible. It silenced the pinstripe man more effectively than anger could. His smirk faltered, but he turned away quickly, pretending indifference. Later, when the dinner service ended, the cabin shifted again. The air seemed charged, as though something was waiting to happen. Conversation lowered into hushed tones, but glances pointed, sharp, kept drifting back toward Karen. She pulled from her backpack a small, worn photograph. Herself, years younger, dressed in hospital scrubs, standing beside a smiling patient. Her fingers lingered on the image before tucking it away. The man in the velvet blazer, sitting 2 rows back, had noticed. "Look at her scribbling," he whispered to his companion, a woman with pearls strung tightly around her neck, probably writing her grocery list. Or maybe her diary full of sob stories. The woman chuckled, pearls clicking as she laughed. Karen's pen paused mid-word. Just for a moment, then it moved again. Deliberate, precise. Up front, the curtain between cabins stirred. Conversations hushed instantly. Stepping through was Sheikh Kareem Al-Fad. Even without introduction, his presence filled the space. Late 60s, dressed not in ostentatious labels but in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his aura commanded the room. He nodded briefly to a few passengers who rushed to greet him. A murmur rippled respect, awe, the acknowledgement of wealth and power. Karen did not rise. She did not glance his way. Her pen continued to move steadily across her notebook. A woman in a cashmere sweater leaned toward her companion, her diamond earrings catching the cabin lights. She didn't even stand for him, she whispered, scandalized. No respect at all. Her companion smirked, tapping his luxury watch. Probably doesn't even know who he is. But Karen knew. She just didn't care. Her reflection in the window stared back at her. Calm, unreadable, shadowed beneath tired eyes. She reached into her pocket, withdrawing a creased hospital ID badge. The name, faded but clear. Dr. Hoa Karen, neurosurgery. She folded it once, tucked it away before anyone noticed, and returned to her silence. The cabin's laughter resumed, but softer now, tinged with unease. Something about the woman in 14B was beginning to disturb them. The night portion of the flight settled in. Lights dimmed, window shades drawn, the cabin bathed in a hushed twilight glow. Some passengers scrolled through tablets, others reclined in their seats, sipping coffee or drifting into shallow sleep. The illusion of serenity floated in the recycled air, fragile as glass. And then glass shattered. A dull, heavy thud jolted the silence. Gasps pierced the cabin as bodies twisted toward the aisle. Sheikh Kareem al-Fahd, the billionaire who had earlier passed like a shadow of power through the rows, was now sprawled on the floor. His hand clutched his chest. His lips pulled tight, sweat beading across his brow. His cane clattered loudly, rolling into the aisle. Chaos erupted instantly. "Help! Somebody help!" a woman screamed. Flight attendants rushed forward, their polished calm cracking into panic. The intercom crackled. "Is there a doctor on board?" For a breathless second, no one moved. Then the cabin swelled with noise people shouting instructions, some bending toward Kareem without knowing what to do. A businessman tried pressing on his chest, his movements clumsy. Another fumbled with Kareem's collar, loosening it in desperation. It was frantic theater, chaos without purpose. Seatbelts clicked. Passengers surged into the aisle, phones raised, eyes wide. And through the storm, one figure rose from 14B, Karen. She stepped into the aisle, her cardigan brushing against seats, her backpack slung loosely across her shoulder. Her face was unreadable, her eyes locked on the fallen man. "Step back," barked a man in a linen suit, his sunglasses still perched absurdly on his head. He thrust an arm out, blocking her path. "She's not qualified. Don't let her touch him." "Yes," a woman in a silk headscarf cried, her voice quivering with fear. "She'll only make it worse. Look at her." But Karen didn't waver. She knelt beside Kareem, her hand pressing to his neck, counting silently. Her lips moved, almost inaudible. Her fingers shifted to his wrist, precise, calm. "Clear the aisle," she said. Her voice cut like a scalpel, soft but undeniable. The man in the linen suit hesitated, his bravado trembling, then stepped back. Karen's assessment was swift. She tilted Kareem's head, checked his pupils, listened to the shallow drag of his breath. Her diagnosis dropped like a verdict. "He's having a stroke." She turned her head toward the nearest flight attendant. "Get the emergency kit. Oxygen. Aspirin. Now." The attendant froze, looking at the crowd as if for permission. The Rolex man gave a nervous laugh. "Her? Seriously?" Karen didn't wait. "Aid, oxygen, go." Her words weren't a request. They were orders. The flight attendant bolted. Karen's hands were already moving. She placed Kareem's head at the right angle, cleared his airway, and began compressions. Her movements carried no hesitation. Each press was measured, each breath guided by years of instinct. The cabin fell into stunned silence, the mockery drowned by the rhythm of her work. Minutes passed like hours. The woman in Chanel clutched her necklace, whispering prayers under her breath. The tech bro with the man bun watched. His earlier smirk erased. Eyes that once burned with ridicule now brimmed with reluctant awe. 15 minutes stretched, taut and merciless. Then Kareem's chest rose with steadier rhythm. His eyelids fluttered. A faint breath rasped from his lips. His eyes opened, dazed but alive. A collective exhale rippled through the cabin. Relief, disbelief, silence. Karen didn't smile, didn't bask. She checked his pulse again, nodded to the attendant, now trembling with the AED kit in her hands, and whispered, "He's stable." She rose, brushed sweat from her forehead, and walked back to 14B. The cabin remained frozen, dozens of eyes following her. She slid into her seat, opened her notebook, and began writing as though nothing had happened. The silence was unbearable. "She got lucky," muttered the woman in the tailored blazer, her voice low but edged with venom. The man beside her nodded quickly, eager to reclaim certainty. "If she's that good, why is she dressed like that? Why isn't she famous?" The whispers spread, weaker than before, but still laced with denial. They needed to believe their scorn was justified. They needed to believe appearances were truth. But deep down, in the quiet corners of their shame, something had shifted. They had just seen the woman they mocked bring a billionaire back from the edge of death with nothing but steady hands and unshakable calm. And that truth could not be unseen. The hum of the engines filled the silence left behind. Passengers shifted in their seats, stealing glances toward 14B as though the woman by the window were suddenly radioactive. She sat there, her notebook open, her pen scratching steadily across the page. Not a flicker of triumph crossed her face, but eyes kept drifting back to the man she had saved. Sheikh Kareem Al-Fad was propped against his seat, oxygen mask secured, his breaths shallow but steady. The attendants hovered nearby, whispering into radios, but his gaze wasn't on them. His eyes, sharp despite the fatigue, swept the cabin until they found her. "You," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "The woman in 14B, bring her here." A ripple of shock passed through the cabin. The nearest attendant froze. "Sir?" "You heard me," Kareem insisted, his tone carrying the same authority that had built empires. "Bring her." The attendant hesitated only a moment before walking down the aisle. Passengers turned their heads, whispering fiercely. Some leaned back as Karen rose, as if her cardigan might brush against their pristine clothes. She walked slowly, unhurried, until she stood at the front. The entire cabin watched, holding its breath. Kareem removed the mask briefly, his eyes searching her face. "I know you," he said softly, though the cabin hung on every word. "Years ago, 2015, they called you the neurosurgery prodigy." His lips curved faintly, not a smile but recognition. "Dr. Hoa Karen." It was a name that detonated like thunder in a sealed chamber. Gasps. A dropped glass. The woman in the fur shawl fumbled her phone, her hands trembling. The man in the pinstripe suit went pale, sinking back in his seat. Even the influencers, who had live-streamed their cocktails moments before, lowered their phones as if the glow of their screens had betrayed them. The cabin whispered her name like an incantation. "Dr. Hoa Karen? No, it can't be. The one from the war zones?" Fragments of memory, half-remembered news articles, resurfaced among them. Stories of a young surgeon who operated in tents under gunfire, who refused lucrative offers from private hospitals, who disappeared after saving hundreds. They had mocked a ghost of greatness, and now the ghost was flesh, breathing, and sitting among them. Karen didn't deny it. She didn't nod either. She simply stood there, her face calm, her shoulders squared. "I did what I could," she said at last. Just 6 words, delivered with the weight of someone who had nothing left to prove. The effect was devastating. The man in the velvet blazer swallowed hard, his earlier joke about grocery lists now echoing back like a curse. The woman with pearls twisted the necklace until her knuckles whitened. The Chanel socialite stared into her wine glass, suddenly fascinated with its reflection. Some tried to salvage dignity. "Probably exaggerated," whispered the woman in sequins, her voice thin. "Media always blows things up." But her companion didn't answer. He just adjusted his pocket square, his eyes locked on the floor. Kareem's voice broke the tension again. "You haven't just saved me tonight. You saved hundreds long before this flight. The world remembers, even if you chose not to." He lowered the mask, his words fading with his breath. But they were enough. The shame in the cabin was suffocating. Karen turned, ready to return to 14B, but every pair of eyes clung to her. She walked the aisle slowly, and in her silence, each passenger heard their own cruelty replayed in their heads. The mocking laughter, the whispered insults, the sneers they rang now as confessions. Back at her seat, she placed her notebook on the tray table. This time, she didn't write. She opened her backpack and withdrew a folded letter, its edges worn thin. She held it just long enough for her thumb to trace the faded ink, a thank you note from a patient's family years ago. Then she slipped it back, closed the bag, and leaned against the window. The engines roared steady, carrying them toward Dubai. Yet inside the cabin, time felt suspended. Every breath thick with guilt and awe. They had wanted her invisible. Now they couldn't stop seeing her. The descent into Dubai began with a soft chime of the seatbelt sign, but the tension in the cabin was louder than the engines. No one seemed to breathe as the lights brightened. People shifted restlessly, unable to escape the weight of what had been revealed. Every whisper, every cruel laugh they had shared hours ago now hung in the air like smoke, impossible to clear. Karen sat still in 14B, her cardigan pulled close, her notebook tucked away. She didn't look around, didn't acknowledge the stares that burned into her from all directions. She gazed out at the streaks of dawn breaking across the horizon, her reflection superimposed over the rising sun. When the plane touched the tarmac, reality slammed back. Through the oval windows, flashing lights strobed against the aircraft security, reporters, and aides waiting for the arrival of one of the world's richest men. The moment the doors opened, the cabin dissolved into chaos. Cameras thrust forward, voices overlapped, journalists shouting in multiple languages. Who saved Sheikh Kareem? Is there a doctor on board? Tell us about the passenger in 14B. No one answered. The businessmen who had ridiculed her hours earlier pulled their jackets tighter and hurried off the plane with lowered heads. The woman in the Chanel dress clutched her handbag close. Her once perfect smile vanished, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. The influencers held their phones low now, desperate not to be recognized. Karen walked at her own pace. Not slow, not hurried. Her backpack slung over one shoulder, her shoes tapping steadily against the jet bridge floor. To most reporters, she was invisible at first, another passenger in plain clothes. Until Kareem himself emerged, leaning on a cane, his face pale but resolute. He raised his hand. Cameras fell silent. "This woman," he said, pointing to her. His voice carried the same command that once bent entire markets to his will. "This is no ordinary doctor. This is the woman the medical world once lost." Microphones surged toward her, flashes erupted. But Karen only inclined her head slightly toward him, gave a polite nod, and continued walking. She didn't slow, didn't pose, didn't answer. Her silence cut sharper than any declaration. For the others, however, silence was impossible. Within hours, the internet filled in the blanks. A passenger's shaky video of the mocking laughter went viral. The man in the pinstripe suit, once so smug, was identified as a hedge fund manager named Derek. His boss saw the footage before Derek even cleared customs. By morning, he was fired. Conduct unbecoming, the press release said. The Chanel woman wasn't spared either. Vanessa, a socialite with a lucrative modeling contract, found herself plastered across gossip blogs, her sneer replayed on loop. By the next day, her contract was quietly terminated. Her so-called friends stopped answering her calls. Claire, the woman in the fur shawl, posted an apology on her social media, calling it a misunderstanding. But the internet is merciless. Sponsors pulled out of her charity gala, and her name was missing from the next invite list. The tech bro with the man bun Ethan watched his startup unravel overnight. Investors withdrew, citing reputation risks. His board forced him to resign within a week. Even Marcus, the Velvet Blazer venture capitalist, wasn't immune. A leaked audio of his grocery list joke circulated. A Middle Eastern conglomerate, whose deal had been his crown jewel, walked away. The influencer in sequins, Sophia, lost her biggest client the next day when her words, probably exaggerated, surfaced. Screenshots, videos, captions, it was everywhere. Her firm let her go before she could post her next curated smile. Each one, in their own corner of privilege, fell under the same shadow. They had mocked a woman for being less. And now, the world mocked them for being small. Karen, meanwhile, was gone from the headlines as quickly as she had entered. She ignored the emails, the phone calls, the invitations that poured in after Kareem's declaration. She slipped out of the terminal unseen, blending into the flow of travelers. She returned not to a hospital boardroom or a billionaire's estate, but to a small clinic far from the spotlight. There, her cardigan was replaced with a white coat. Her hands were steady as ever, saving lives no camera would ever record. The passengers from 14B's flight carried something heavier than scandal. Shame. Shame that lingered in boardrooms, in cocktail parties, in private whispers. Shame that could not be erased by money or apologies. For them, cruelty had a price. For Karen, silence remained her power. The headlines roared for days, but Hoa Karen never read them. She didn't need to. While the world dissected the viral clips and replayed the moment she saved Sheikh Kareem al-Fahd, she was already gone, her faded cardigan exchanged for a plain white coat inside a modest clinic, far from skyscrapers and flashing cameras. Here, the patients didn't wear diamond watches. They came in with dirt under their nails, calluses on their palms, and fear in their eyes. Farmers with injured hands, children with fevers, mothers carrying infants wrapped in old blankets. Karen listened to them the same way she had listened to the billionaire gasping for breath on the floor of the plane with calm, steady patience. Her silence wasn't absence, it was presence. Meanwhile, the passengers from 14B's flight were still haunted. Derek, the hedge fund manager, found his name permanently stained. No firm wanted to hire the man whose cruelty had been broadcast to millions. Vanessa, the Chanel woman, became a pariah in the fashion world. Ethan's startup dissolved. Marcus's deals evaporated. Sophia's career crumbled. Each had lost the one thing they thought unshakable, their reputations. But Karen never sought revenge. She never spoke of them again. If she knew of their downfall, she gave no sign. Perhaps she understood what they never had. Cruelty destroys itself. Weeks later, Kareem's aides tracked her down. They arrived with contracts, promises of wealth, and a personal request from the Sheikh himself. To become his family's chief medical advisor, to step once more into the global stage. Karen listened, her expression unreadable. She declined. Her refusal baffled them. "Why turn away such an opportunity?" they asked. She only replied, "Because saving lives doesn't require a stage." Her words never reached the headlines. They weren't sound bites for the evening news. They were meant for the young nurse beside her, the farmer sitting in the waiting room, the little girl clutching a crayon drawing of a doctor with a halo. For Karen, silence was not emptiness. It was strength, the kind that had carried her through nights in war zones when bombs shook the ground and wounded soldiers lined the halls. The kind that had carried her through mockery at 30,000 feet. The kind that needed no applause, no spotlight. The world, however, did not forget. Her name lingered in conversations, a symbol whispered in classrooms, in hospitals, in places where judgment weighed heavy. Doctor. Hoa Karen became a reminder that greatness often hides in plain sight, clothed not in wealth but in humility. On quiet evenings, when the clinic closed and the last patient left, Karen sometimes sat alone with her notebook. She would flip through the filled pages, notes, sketches, fragments of thought. Between the lines, a story unfolded, one she never planned to publish. It was the record of a life lived in service, measured not by applause but by the steady beat of lives she had touched. She didn't write for the world. She wrote to remember. And the passengers from that flight, they too remembered. Every time they stepped onto a plane, every time they caught their own reflection in polished glass, they saw her sitting in 14B, silent, calm, unshaken. The memory was their punishment. The strength of silence had cut deeper than words ever could. Message of the story. Do not judge someone by the clothes they wear, the bag they carry, or the silence they keep. The truest power often comes without noise. Real strength is not in titles, wealth, or applause. It is in choosing what is right when no one believes in you, and standing tall without needing to be seen. In the end, silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes, silence is the loudest truth of all.